This article is a very brief summary of a look at eschatology. A universal church position is that Jesus will return physically and bodily, but it's often a question about how should we interpret the book of Revelation? Is there a rapture of the saints, and if so, when? And is there a literal millennium, and if so, when? Well, with regard to Revelation, there appears to be four possible answers. They are the preterist, the historicist, the futurist, and the idealist. Now, the preterist basically says all the book of Revelation took place at the beginning, around the time of Nero, etc. The historicist says it's a continuous unfolding of history from the time of Nero right through to the second coming and beyond, actually, to new heavens, new earth. And then the futurist says it's really for the last 7 years, most of the book. And then the idealist basically sees this book as a type of how good overcomes evil rather than an attempt to see what really is going to happen. Then when we come to the issue of the rapture, there are various positions considered as well. Does it begin at the beginning of the 7 years of tribulation? If you're a futurist, that's one position. Another one says that the rapture, which is the taking up of the saints, when Jesus takes the saints out of the earth, would say that this takes place in the middle of the 7 years of tribulation. And then others might suggest it's just prior to Jesus' physical return to earth. A position I think I have some sympathy towards. And then the final position is to say the rapture is at the same time as Jesus comes to earth, which would have been traditionally the position I had held. But, it's worth knowing what the different positions are, even if you don't agree with them. And likewise with the millennium. The premillennialists, there's the amillennialists, and then the postmillennialists. And I would say traditionally the church's teaching has been premillennial, that Christ returns to reign for 1,000 years. Amillennial says the church age is the millennium, or some such, and that there really isn't a millennium where Christ reigns on earth in a physical sense. And then the postmillennialists say that Christ returns to earth after the church has established a millennial reign on earth. The millennium is an interesting one because I'm not actually sure that many Christians are really worked up about it, and it doesn't really feature much in the Bible. But it's worth knowing that there exists these different positions, and I think one of the issues I have sometimes is that we shy away from complex, difficult, sometimes contentious issues, where we should actually just be honest and say, well, there are different approaches, and be open to see which you think is really the one that's happening. I'll give you why that's important. If you think about it, when Jesus came the first time, there were some very set views about who the Messiah was going to be. Now, I would say the dominant view was that the Messiah was going to be a mighty warrior to defeat the Romans. And so when Jesus came doing what he was doing, the authorities and the general population were confused and were in some ways unwilling to respond appropriately to Jesus' return, which is a tragedy. And it was because they had a fixed view about what they thought the Messiah was going to be. Well, likewise, they should have known that there were always two understandings of who the Messiah could have been. One was the Ben David, son of David, understanding, which was the conquering king. But there was also always been the Ben Joseph version of the Messiah, the suffering Messiah. And had they been open in their understanding and teaching of who the Messiah could be, they would have said, this is the Ben Joseph Messiah, and therefore would have responded positively to Jesus and said, okay, the Ben David one, the son of David one, is coming, but not necessarily right now. What we're getting is the first type of Messiah, the suffering Messiah, which actually, had they read their Bible, the Old Testaments carefully, they've seen that has always been the case. Suffering comes first, then the glory. Well, likewise with the second coming, is it possible that when we come to that our fixed notions of what we think the second coming should look like and how it should happen may preclude us from seeing what actually God is doing? And I like to keep an open mind. I'm a historicist, therefore I tend to be very keen on the historicist interpretation, but I keep an open mind about the possibility of the futurist being correct. I am, by and large, dubious about an early rapture. I tend to think the rapture will either be when the second coming happens or just prior to it. But I keep an open mind. As regards the millennium, I tend to be pretty much think there will be a 1,000-year reign, not because I particularly want it to be, but because that looks like what the Bible says. But I'm open to whatever happens, and I will look forward to that, whatever God does. But I think it's important not to close down options, because sometimes when God does something, our intransigence can prevent us from seeing what God is doing. And I think it's useful to know what the options are, interesting to know how people come to those positions, and worth keeping your mind open, and that you might at least not miss what God actually is doing. Well, thank you for listening.